Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Morning Break. We hope you've enjoyed the show so far. Please stay tuned as we have a lot more to come.
But now it's time to introduce our guest for today. We have with us Sister Fatima Ladek, who I'm sure you've all heard of. We've used her recitations during Haram, especially on Children of Ashura. Assalamu alaikum, Fatima.
Alaikum salam.
Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, when did you first start reciting, and then how did it all come about?
Well, I first started reciting when I was 6, and this was at mosque. It came about, I grew up in an environment where there was reciting all around me. My grandfather, my brother and my dad recite. So there was always reciting going on. We used to attend programs. And since I was young, I had an interest in it. So I began to recite more and more.
So did you feel that it was really helpful having that support from your family during your recitation, or did they used to help you and sit down with you while you were practicing?
Of course, yeah. I used to practice with my dad, and we still do. So I love to recite, and it's kind of, because I've grown up in an environment, it helps to have them support and encourage me, and it's nice to have them around.
How many actually albums then have you recorded?
I've recorded 5 albums, 4 Noha albums and 1's Mankabat. I've also done some English tracks for the channel, which were on Children of Ashura.
There are hardly any female reciters out there, so why do you think it's important to really, get the female voice out there and have that encouragement?
There are female reciters out there, and I do think it is important to develop and encourage them, because some of our local centres tend to call people from overseas to recite. So if there's a reason that reciter can't come, then there will be a need for youngsters from our own community to recite. So I think that if the potential is there, then it is important for it to be identified and developed so that there is a need for them.
Who writes the latniyas, the nohas that you recite? Do you have any sort of contribution to them at all?
When I was recording previous albums, we actually used to use nohas that other reciters had recited. It's only in the past couple of years that we've started to get new kalams written, and we think of concepts, and if it is possible, then the writers will try and write on that idea. But there are many different writers who write for other well-known reciters, such as the poets are Dr. Rehan Azmi, Mir Takallum, Yaver Yusufi, and they're all based in Pakistan.
Well, that's really great to know that you kind of have a certain concept within all of them. But how do you know how to actually recite them? Do they give you the actual lyrics and you decide how to recite them, or?
If it is a new kalam, then the tune will need to be composed. That's usually done by Shahid Baltistani, who's another well-known reciter. He also helps in the production of my CD, and I'm very grateful to him for that. So what happens is he makes the tune up, and then he'll pass it on to my dad, who will pass it on to me, and it's sort of learnt like that.
Yeah, he's actually a very well-known reciter.
Reciter.
We've actually played some of his nohas also on the channel. I've often heard male reciters on the tracks with you, and I've been told that that's actually your brother. So that's pretty cool, isn't it? The fact that you're actually reciting with your own brother on tracks.
Yeah, it's nice to have my older brother Shahid on the tracks, because he's always there supporting me and encouraging me in whatever I do. So it is really nice to have him on the tracks, because at home we're always practicing together. I learn from him, so it's really nice for him to be on the tracks as well.
That's lovely, and that must be really nice for your family to really all be a part of it as well. I know there's controversy around this idea of a female reciting. Could you clarify, because I'm sure people are watching thinking, how does that work? Could you clarify what the actual ruling is on that?
Prior to the first album, we did ask the resident alim what his views were, and he said that there shouldn't be a problem, but he inquired from Agha Sistani's office as to whether it was okay. We received word that it was okay, and there is no problem with a female reciting on a CD.
Could you tell us about how the recording actually takes place? Because I know on your CDs sometimes there's also like a chorus, there's men there. How does that work?
What happens is, I'll go into the studio and I'll record my bits first, then I'll leave, then the chorus will go in and record their bits, and then what happens is the technician mixes it all together. So we're not standing side by side and reciting together, because we do make mistakes, so we will need to retake it. So the technician will mix it all together, and then that's how it's all put together.
Brilliant.
And do you practice a lot? Sort of, how many times a day, do you have to practice, or and maybe at home, to sort of make sure that your voice is at I don't know, at an optimum level or something?
Usually what happens is, if I do have to recite somewhere, then I will practice, usually until I actually get what I'm trying to practice right. That'll usually probably just be twice, maybe, with my father and my brother. I will practice with them until I know what I'm doing and I know that it's going to be right and I won't mess it up, basically.
Do you find that's really straining on your voice? Because, is there a certain time that you actually think it's best for you to practice? Because I just remember seeing an interview with someone else once, and they said that they wake up first thing in the morning because apparently they start practicing from an early time because your voice is raw or something like that. So is there a best time to practice?
For me, I'll just practice whenever I want to practice. I mean, I'll do it, if my voice is a bit down, then I won't, but I'll just practice whenever I want to.
And have you ever had to go and recite somewhere and got really ill and it's been really difficult? Like when you get a flu or a cold or something, that must be quite difficult to recite.
It is, but I do try my best. I drink lots of water, so that helps as well. And I do try my best to recite as best as I can.
So what is the reception like from other people in your community or the mosque that you go to? Are they sort of warm towards you, the fact that, and they're constantly saying, let's get Fatima to read, let's get Fatima to recite? What is their response? Because usually in our community it's sort of the more elder, mature women that tend to recite in female gatherings. So is it sort of really nice, the fact that you've got these women who have been reciting for maybe 10, 15 years, and then they're sort of turning to you and say, Fatima, you recite, and they're giving you preference?
Yeah, it is quite nice, because the feedback we get from the community is quite nice, especially when there's gatherings. They will call me to mosque to recite, so it is nice when they call me to recite. And I do feel that it's nice that they actually give me preference, because as you said, most of the women who do recite are elderly. I hope that by me reciting, more youngsters will feel inspired to come out and recite as well, because I think that's what our local centres need at the moment. And also, people from London will call me to come and recite at gatherings, at their houses, at the mosques. So it is quite nice. If somebody hears I'm in town, then they will say, Fatima's in town, we should call her to come and recite. So it is nice to be given preference like that, yeah.
And do you find that you bump into a lot of people who say, oh, you're Fatima, we've heard your stuff online, and how does that feel?
They don't actually know what I look like. So if they haven't actually met me before, then they won't know who I am. But it is nice meeting people who know who you are. I mean, obviously they like to come and talk to you, so it is nice meeting new people, yeah.
I think people are going to now know what you look like, seeing you come on morning break.
Yeah.
Because for me, it was quite a surprise, when I, saw Fatima, and I thought, oh, look, I can now put a face to, to who this person is, we constantly, we do broadcast on the channel, and it's just so nice to sort of, because you're so young, and you've got, your whole life ahead of you, mashallah. Do you see yourself, always reciting for the Ahlul Bayt, the alayhim as-salam?
Inshallah, I plan to carry on with this for as long as I can, with the grace of Almighty, because He's the one who's given me the opportunity to be here and spread the message of Karbala and the Ahlul Bayt. So I do plan to carry on for as long as I can, inshallah.
Inshallah. And so if anyone wants to kind of listen to your stuff, do you have a website? Or I know you're on YouTube, aren't you?
Yeah, I have my own website. It's fatimaladak.com. They can just visit that. All my albums are on there. They can download them and listen to them. And there's also, they can email us via the contact box. So inshallah, we will get the email and try to reply.
Inshallah. Could you tell us a bit, because before we started filming, I asked you how old you were, and seeing as you're 14 years old, how do you juggle reciting and almost like having a role? You have a role in the community, mashallah, which is fantastic, but how do you juggle that as well as making sure you focus on your work?
I am quite balanced with my schoolwork and reciting. I try to get my schoolwork finished as quick as possible. So I think that's the thing I would say to anybody who wants to recite. If you're quite organised, then you should just balance your schoolwork and reciting. It's not that hard to be able to recite and do your schoolwork as well.
Do you just recite in the UK, or have you been sort of, to America or anywhere to recite?
Alhamdulillah, I've had the privilege of going to ziyarats to Iraq and Iran to be able to recite in front of the Rozas. I've also been to Pakistan, to Dubai, to the States and Canada. So yeah, I have been to other countries as well.
And what's the general reaction when you go over there? Have people heard of you? I'm assuming you're very well known over there.
Yeah, I mean, if they hear that I am in town, they will try to organise a mushaira for me, because they know that I'm there and I would recite for them. So they do try to organise a program for me.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier that you recite with your brother. What's that like, and how do you plan the best way to go about that?
Well, we will think of different ideas and different concepts to get the poets to write on. There was one from a couple of years back called Kya Mujhe Chhod Ke. That concept was basically on the relationship between the brother and sister, Hazrat Ali Akbar and Bibi Sughra. So we thought it'd be nice for me and Shahid to recite that together. And the concept was thought of, and we asked the writer to write for us, and alhamdulillah, that was done.
So your brother is obviously featured on some of your tracks, and seeing as that he's obviously a lot older than you, how come you heavily feature on the tracks as opposed to your brother?
I kind of took the first step to this, so I think he's kind of leaving me to it right now. But it's not to say that he wouldn't come and do this. He does actually recite quite a lot. He goes to a lot of juluses, a lot of gatherings. He has his own group in Birmingham, so they travel around quite a lot to recite. It's nice, mashallah.
And you mentioned earlier that alhamdulillah, you've had the opportunity to go on ziyarah and actually recite there. What does that feel like? That must be such an honor, and also, is it hard for you sometimes not to cry, for example, when you're reciting quite powerful words?
It's absolutely amazing, the feeling of being there, because I think that's what every reciter wants to do. He wants to be there, and he wants to be in front of the person that you're doing it for. And it is very emotional, and it is very emotional when you're standing there. I mean, the feelings you have inside you, they're just amazing.
How do you keep control of that when you're reciting? Because it must be quite hard not to just want to break down in tears.
It is quite hard, but you've got to keep it under control.
And what would you say in terms of like having the opportunity to recite? What would you say is your most memorable moment when you've been on ziyarah?
It's actually reciting inside the roza. It's great. I mean, it's just like you're sitting there, you're in front of them. It's amazing. The feeling is just absolutely amazing.
So when you were growing up, who did you listen to? Whose Nohas, Miyas did you listen to? Who was your inspiration?
I used to listen to quite a lot of people when I was growing up. It was a wide variety of people. I used to listen quite a lot to Shahid Baltistani, Mir Hassan Mir, Nadeem Sarwar, and I think I absolutely love their Nohas, and I've actually had the privilege of meeting them. So it's actually really nice to recite for them and meet them, because I used to listen to them when I was younger, so it's nice to actually meet them.
Do you actually prefer doing Urdu Nohas or English? Because I know all your albums are actually in Urdu. Don't you find it difficult? Wouldn't you just prefer to do it in English?
I think the main language I do recite in is Urdu, so it's easier for me to recite in Urdu, but for English as well, because I understand it more than the Urdu, it is nice to recite in English as well.
Have you felt that reciting in Urdu has actually helped your Urdu in general, like spoken Urdu?
Yeah, it has, because Urdu is not actually my language, so I didn't understand it. But since I've been reciting, I've begun to understand it more and more, and it's actually helped me with speaking Urdu and understanding it as well.
Loads of people say that when you recite in English, or even when you say something like, for example, even if you're reciting Masayib in English, that you lose that sense of emotion and that the power that you have in languages such as Urdu or Farsi or even Arabic. Do you think that's true when it comes to reciting Nohe? Have you felt like when you're reciting English Nohe that it's just not the same?
I think some of the emotions and words come across better in Urdu than they do in English, partly because of the way that it's put and the way that you recite it. But in English, because you understand it more, you do get that same sort of effect as you would when reciting in Urdu.
Do you think then you'll maybe increase your recitals in English more?
Inshallah, I do hope to. I mean, if somebody asked me to recite in English, I wouldn't have a problem with it.
Do you think you will actually maybe launch an album totally in English? Because I personally think that would be quite beneficial, not just for the youngsters, people at your age, but also like non-Muslims who don't know anything about Karbala, and then they'll, you know, because it's in English, then they'll listen to it, and then from there they'll learn about the message of Imam Hussein Islam and what happened.
I'm not sure as yet if we would release an album in English, but inshallah in the future that could happen, so yeah.
Do you listen to any other people who recite in English? What kind of stuff do you like listening to these days that's in English?
I've heard Abadar who recites in English Nohas. I've also heard different tracks by different people. They actually recite quite well, mashallah, as well, so it's nice listening to other people in the language that you understand.
Well, thank you so much, Fatima, for coming on the show and, you know, talking to us. And I know this is the first time that you've actually appeared on TV. So thank you again so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, it's now time for a short break, but you do have just enough time to make yourself another cup of tea, and we'll see you in a few minutes' time, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Morning Break. We hope you've enjoyed the show so far. Please stay tuned as we have a lot more to come.
But now it's time to introduce our guest for today. We have with us Sister Fatima Ladek, who I'm sure you've all heard of. We've used her recitations during Haram, especially on Children of Ashura. Assalamu alaikum, Fatima.
Alaikum salam.
Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, when did you first start reciting, and then how did it all come about?
Well, I first started reciting when I was 6, and this was at mosque. It came about, like, I grew up in an environment where there was reciting all around me. My grandfather, my brother and my dad recite, so there was always reciting going on. We used to attend programs, and since I...
How many actually albums then have you recorded?
I've recorded 5 albums, 4 Noha albums and 1's Mankabat. I've also done some English tracks for the channel which were on Children of Ashura.
There are hardly any female reciters out there, so why do you think it's important to really, you know, get the female voice out there and have that encouragement?
There are female reciters out there, and I do think it is important to develop and encourage them, because some of our local was young, I had an interest in it, so I began to recite more and more.
So did you feel that it was really helpful having that support from your family during your recitation, or did they used to help you and sit down with you while you were practicing?
Of course, yeah. I used to practice with my dad, and we still do. So I love to recite, and it's kind of, because I've grown up in an environment, it helps to have them support and encourage me, and it's nice to have them around. Centres tend to call people from overseas to recite, so if there's a reason that that reciter can't come, then there will be a need for youngsters from our own community to recite. So I think that if the potential is there, then it is important for it to be identified and developed, so that there is a need for them.
Who writes the latmiyas, the nohas that you recite? Do you have any sort of contribution to them at all?
When I